All right, well, welcome everybody. This is part of the panel series that we're doing here with Climate Farmers Academy, where we bring in some of the most relevant topics for our community that come up in our conversations with farmers and try and shed some light and bring some new information into the conversation through experienced people and experts in our network. Today, we're joined with Megan Sapp and Stefan Gernert, and hopefully Marco will show up shortly. And today we're going to be talking about the role of integrating livestock into regenerative farms. There's a lot of different ways that we can explore this topic, and that's exactly why I chose our speakers today. Through this discussion, we're going to be aiming to debunk some of the myths while exploring the ecological role of well-managed livestock. This is a hot button issue in the sector right now. There's a lot of talk about the emissions and the limits to sustainability in managing livestock, especially in extensive applications. And we're going to be going over holistic grazing systems, balancing livestock numbers with land capacity, economic models for regenerative livestock operations, animal welfare in regenerative systems, and a lot more. But before we jump in, I would like to give our speakers a chance to introduce themselves, and from there we'll jump into the topic. So Megan, would you like to start us off?
Why, thank you, Oliver, and thank you guys so much for the invitation. I'm very happily calling in today, actually on my farm, or at Curly Creek Ranch in northern Nevada in Spain. So together with my husband, we've been holistically managing this piece of land for 7 years now. We've had it for 11, but holistically managed for 7. I'm an accredited field professional in the Savory Institute and co-hub leader of Hub del Norte. So our area of influence is northern Spain and France. In addition to that, I'm also the advocacy director for the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture. But today, I think I'm pretty heavily savory.
Nice. Stefan, can you give us an intro into your work and how you're operating on your farm out there?
Yeah, so I'm based in Estonia. Actually, I've been based all over the place really for the last, my wife and I looked at it, for in the last 6 years, we lived in 5 different countries. So it's been quite incredible. But now we settled down here in Estonia. I'm an advisor mainly, and really coming into the regenerative agriculture space from that, learning about it perspective and then trying to find my way into it. I'm a transition manager on a large-scale arable farm here in Estonia, about 4,500 hectares, helping them to kind of move towards, well, regeneration, really, step by step. And we also have a beef breeding operation where we look at how do we integrate grazing animals back into arable farms in a way that is profitable for the beef producer and also ecological and from a production perspective, beneficial for the arable farmer. So yeah, that's the two things I'm doing mainly. And today I'm also an accredited professional with the Savory Institute. Megan and I, we know each other actually from there, so it's quite nice to represent the Savory Institute in this panel as well.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So, since both of you are representing Savory here and the network that is global at this point, maybe Megan, since you're the head of Hub del Norte here in Spain, could you give us a quick overview of how this network operates and what it seeks to promote globally?
Yeah, happy to. So the Savory Network is a group of, I think we're around 50 hubs right now around the world. What we do is we take the universal knowledge of holistic management, ecosystem literacy, and understanding how ecosystem processes work, and in many cases, how we can use animals as ecosystem management tools. And then we bring that to the local context. So as I mentioned, we're working mostly, but not exclusively, but mostly in the north of Spain and France, which have very heterogeneous contexts, whereas the other hub in Spain, for example, that works more in the Dehesa Montado region, so southern Spain and Portugal, that's much more homogeneous. So we work across a wide range of points. So within holistic management, when we talk about brittleness, we're talking about how much humidity is in the environment throughout the course of the year. So something from like Galicia, where we have rainfall pretty much year round, to many places near Catalonia, like where you guys are, Oliver, or Teruel, where you can get 150 or 200 millimeters a year of rain. So lots of different contexts, but how we apply holistic management and these decision-making tools in these environments depends on where we are along that brittleness scale.
Thank you for that description. Now, Stefan, also with your experience here, I know is uniquely being applied right now to integrating livestock into arable systems. Can you talk a bit about how the Savory framework facilitates this process?
Yeah, and the savory framework is very interesting because in the end, it's a decision-making framework. It doesn't really, it's on a second note, it has to do with animals and how the ecosystem works, but it's more about how you're going to manage your life, how you're going to manage the land that you are a steward of, so to speak, right? So in that perspective, it fits really well with the framework that I am because well, we are of course working in a landscape, but we're working with the operations that I'm working on. They're pretty much conventional large-scale dairies, and we're then trying to look at looking at the whole operation. How can we work with the land? How can we use the different layers of the operation? Let's say they have lactating animals, they have dry animals, they have growing young animals. How can we work with them in order to stimulate the let's say the health of the land, because they use the land to grow crops in order to feed the animals. So we're trying to build a more holistic closed loop around their farms. That's one of the things I'm doing. Yeah.
So, can you give me an idea about what some of the advantages and the challenges are for integrating livestock into arable operations? Where are some of the benefits ecologically, and where are farmers finding sticking points or difficulties?
Yeah, I think the first sticking point is actually first principles, because like a dairy farmer, he focuses on milk production. He doesn't really look at the animal as a tool with which he can influence the landscape, right? Like this was a big aha moment for me as well, that, oh, I'm actually working with nature. So moving the farmers into that place where, oh, this is nature. Oh, we're influencing it with our actions. It's a big turning point. But where the animals can actually benefit ecologically is very clearly what one of the biggest limitations in the productions that I work with, because they are all arable farms, even the ones that have dairies, they're still arable farms because they need to produce fodder for the animals. So they grow grains and corn, etc. So we're looking at crop rotation. The animals allow us to really expand the crop rotation quite in a way that we can actually work with some of these principles they already understand. Something like cover crops. Okay, why do cover crops work? Oh, okay. What if we have a cover crops that will be grazed? Can we increase the effectiveness of those cover crops? And that's a language that the farmers really, really understand. So I'm not going to them and talk about regenerative systems per se. I talk about how do things actually work and how can we work with that and therefore produce a better production. And that's where most of the farms actually start to understand what are we trying to do here.
Fantastic. Now back to Megan. Can you give us more of an overview about the role of livestock in ecosystems in general and why it's so important to manage them consciously or holistically rather than just letting them be out in the landscape as has become so very common?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's really interesting because these days I'm running a holistic management comprehensive course here at the ranch. We've got a cohort of 9 students from all over Europe, really diverse contexts. And we're talking exactly about this, how animals can be used as ecosystem management tools, how we can purposely be overgrazing or purposely being over resting an area because we're trying to achieve an outcome, right? So if, as Stefan is talking about, how can we be improving the ecosystem health? How can we be increasing the productivity of that land? How can we be increasing how much forage we're able to? Ooh, yes, we love all the forage. How we can be using the animals to do that. How over time we can be increasing our stocking rates, how we can be lowering the cost of production, whether it is for dairy or for meat, or in our case, we have pastured chickens and pastured turkeys. How can we be really flipping on its head our understanding of the role of these animals? And so I think, understanding, context. So every farm is its own situation. Even our farm that's right next to a different, to our neighbor's farm, they have a completely different context. They have a different, they're growing organic certified apples. They're fairly conventional in their production methodology and the inputs they use, even though they're technically organic. And then, we're next to a dairy cooperative that is managing arable land in a very conventional way. So it's we can see very clearly how these different management systems have different results, even though we're in, within a couple hundred meters of each other, right? And being able to see those differences allows us to learn and to understand how, with just some very small changes in management, paying attention to growing seasons, paying attention to when, the grass is growing quickly and how we can get the most out of that, when the growth is starting to slow down, and how we adapt the movements of the animals in order to match that. This allows us to focus on things like, how can we get more productivity here? So it's really an exciting opportunity when you get into it, right? And we are looking today at ecological monitoring, so understanding how to read the land, be able to look and see how things are changing because of our management. And we were reviewing some of our baseline data from 5 years ago when we started tracking these things, and looking at the photos of then, looking at the photos of now, the differences we see in spring or fall or summer, and how having this information allows us to improve the results, the outcomes that we're looking for.
Fantastic. Now, luckily, we were able to be joined by Marco. He's here now, so I'm going to pass over to him. Marco, how you doing, buddy? Can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and the farm where you work in Italy?
Yes, for sure. First of all, sorry to everyone. I just found the last minute problem in the farm this evening.
No worries at all. We're really glad to have you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Marco Carbonara. I'm from Pulicaro Farm from Italy. We live with my family on a volcanic plateau, 600 meters on the sea level. And we manage a farm that is around 100 hectares. That is mostly focused on pasture-raised animals. So we have 25 cows, 220 pigs, 150 goat and sheep. And we raise annually more or less 15,000 birds on pasture. So chickens mostly, but some turkeys as well, some geese, some ducks. And yes, I'm a founding member of EARA, and very happy. I joined EARA through Climate Farmers 3 years ago. So I tried to do my part also in kind of association contest. So that's all for the moment, I think.
Thanks so much, Marco. So we were just talking about the ecological benefits of integrating livestock and managing them consciously. Can you give us an example from your own place, because you have such a diversity of animals, how you manage that complexity in order to get the ecological results that you're looking for on your land?
As Megan was saying, there is no obviously general recipe for this, but every single context is different. But I want to tell you that my feeling, my idea is that, yes, if you add complexity at a certain level, this starts becoming something easier, okay? Just background noise. And yes, so for example, when we arrived in Pulicaro, we realized that the things that usually a lot of farmers are used to start with, so maybe cereals or vegetable garden or herbivores, from my point of view, in my farm was not possible to start with this because the soil was not enough rich to sustain this kind of activities. So we started with poultry and pigs that are not the best animals for increasing the complexity and the organic matter into the soil, but are the best one if your soil is not so rich. So you can start adding complexity, you can start adding organic matter into an ecosystem through animals that enjoy the pasture but don't need the pasture 100% compared to a cow or compared to a sheep or whatever. And so we honestly feel that, for example, I want to make you a practical example. When we now have the first 5 hectares of olive orchard that are that where we practice it, aggressive pastoral ecology practices. Now these olives are the only one in the farm that never ever get sick, that never ever have pests, that are more stable in production, that you just need to prune them once a year. Sorry, I was seeing that someone was raising his hand.
Stefan, did you have a question there?
No, I wanted to just raise the hand because I love what you're saying, Marco, and I just wanted to add something to it. But after you're done, that's what. So, yeah, but
Please,
whenever you're
I
done,
like
yeah,
chatting, so feel free, and
yeah.
I can go on later, please.
Yeah, no, I got so inspired what you said by adding complexity, and often we hear this all the time in this space, and I had some really cool moments in my work because, that's something that I've learned from Alan Savory. One of the characteristics of a complex system is they're self-organizing, right? So very often we don't have to micromanage these things. We can make small changes and kind of just change the direction of how the ecosystem will express itself. And I can see this in my work where we work on really like large scale arable farms. We talk thousands of hectares, and you can imagine how these farms look like. They're monocultures, pretty much. They are beautiful in spring, and then they're just dry right now because we're in the middle of grain, like grain ripening, let's say. So when we start adding the animals to it, all of a sudden we have an element of green growing grass, which is photosynthesizing all year round. The way we manage the animals, to Megan's point, we're not grazing very hard because we actually want flowering plants in the pastures because it's the only, let's say, habitat for these animals and insects to exist within the landscape, right? So we can see the effects. We're actually shifting how the whole landscapes function just by adding grazing animals into that kind of desert-like ecosystem. It sounds very black and white. It's not so black and white, but you can see very clearly the benefits by just making small changes and then kind of step back and just observe, and it's beautiful. And the farms that we're walking with them into these pastures because they are very hesitant. We're building the operation we are building is pretty much a demonstration site. The things we talk about, just show it because it speaks. Well, what do they say? A picture says more than 1,000 words, right? So we're walking into these fields with grazing cover crops, and people are just like, there's nothing negative about this. This is just beautiful, like all over the place, So, and that is also part of the ecosystem because we are part of the ecosystem also, right? So if we get the people to shift their mindset, it's the same complexity that changes the landscape, changes the mindset of people as well. I just wanted to add to that, Marco. So I didn't want to take your time. I just wanted to get inspired by what you said.
Well, I'd like to jump in there a bit as well and really reiterate the benefits of integrating little dinosaurs into your system. Chickens and turkeys are amazing little regenerators just because of their action of, scratching and pecking and eating plants and eating bugs and cycling those minerals. And, they've got such quick revenue streams, so if you're selling eggs, pretty quickly, or you're selling fattening birds pretty quickly, it allows you to make a huge impact on your land in a really short amount of time, which then, while also having revenue, you don't have to wait 2 years to fatten a cow, right? Which allows you to really move those ecosystem processes forward very quickly so that you can start shifting and you can introduce other things. When we took over our land, it was very poorly managed by the dairy co-op. My husband says that not knowingly, we bought a forest of thistles, right? So in order to shift that, we integrated first, horses. Horses do not like thistles, by the way. They will eat them when they're young, but when they're, 2 meters tall, not really a fan. So we, chopped those down and then started integrating the horses. And now we have very little thistle and it's mostly pasture. And in fact, it's so good in spring. I know we need cattle because that is, ideal for ruminants, not ideal for a horse's digestive system. They have a risk of, foundering, getting fat, this whole sort of thing. So that's a whole other source of complexity. But back to the chickens, there's an area where we had thistles, we introduced goats, then we put in the chicken tractor after that. And we have recovered that land so quickly and to such an extent in about a year and a half, that now we're converting that into gardens. So this is when we're talking about integrating livestock as ecosystem management tool, this is what we're talking about. how we can shift the land from being appropriate to goat to being appropriate to sheep, how we can go from horses to cows. But it all depends on, understanding that these are tools and not being married to, I'm a limousine cattle farmer, or I'm a horse rancher, or I'm a whatever. It's using the tool for getting, and I see Stefan be like, it depends. But we're also, as managers, making these conscious decisions about getting to a certain place in the succession of plants and then deciding to hold ourselves there. So if you want to be a cattle producer, great. But you don't necessarily start with the land that's appropriate for cattle, and you need to get there. So which tools can I use in order to get there? And then once I'm there, well, then I can hold it there, and that's fine. But how can we be introducing, starting to understand the role of animals in a different way instead of I am this?
What I'm getting from all of these descriptions here, and I'll get back to you in a second, Marco, is that you may begin at a certain point ecologically or even with the options that you have in your enterprises. But as the management gains in complexity and you start to move forward in ecological succession, all sorts of new opportunities and options present themselves for which you must then adapt. And if you keep going forward with the original strategy, you're either going to stagnate or potentially even move back if your management doesn't adapt to the changing situations in the ecology that you manage. Now, Marco, we could sort of cut you off there a little bit with your story. Can you please resume with how you started to increase the complexity on your farm over time as these new options came available?
Yes, and then I would just want to remember that, especially Megan touched base on few aspects that I want to go deeper about, also the economical sustainability of these kind of practices. Yes, anyway, I think that our role is to be able to read what is in front of us. I think that the most dangerous thing is starting a farm, telling yourself that you want to produce that good because the market request is, because it's more pricey or whatever. So I think that the most important thing is understanding what is in front of you and trying to start from there. You have a lot of thistles. The soil is just telling you that soil has been compacted during the winter, during the humid, when the soil was humid, and then probably you can have some chance to cultivate artichokes. But what I'm telling is that you have to start also from something that is economically sustainable. And Megan was saying that at the very beginning, no one, some can, but most parts of the farmers can't afford to start a herd of cows because it's too expensive. You will have your first revenues in, she was saying 2 years, but if you buy a calf, a female calf, you have to wait 5 years before selling the first beef. So it's unsustainable. So we started with chickens and with eggs because they have, especially if you really can fine-tune them on the ecosystem, they can have a very good impact on the soil in terms of nitrogen, in terms of nutrients, and in terms of soil disturbance that will improve biodiversity. Another thing that I think is really important that helps us a lot developing the farm is that, again, every single year is different. In the same orchard, in the same olive orchard we have now, that now can host is 1 hectare more or less, that now can host 3 times per year 100 sheep, plus 2 or 3 times per year 350 chickens. At the very beginning, we were just putting on the same land just 120 chickens. Because it's very easy to overload with animals, the pasture. You can rotate, you can be fast, but at the end, and so it's better, something that maybe is not popular, but sometimes it's better to keep your animals indoor for 2-3 months when the regeneration is not complete, instead of keeping them outside in an environment that will become muddy, will become compacted, and will be not healthy for your animal. So better a decent indoor instead of always outdoor without the real possibility of doing this. You have to read your soil, your environment, and ask him what the soil can bring you back. Not too much. I'm not know if I explained well this.
This is perfect. And I want to thank all of you for giving really tangible examples for how this looks beyond just the concept of how livestock can be used in regeneration, but you actually using your own stories. And I want to go from here then to look at some of the myths and misconceptions that are very popular at the moment in demonizing many different forms of livestock because they have been mismanaged in recent decades as drivers of climate change, as drivers of ecological degradation. Maybe Megan, you're a good one to start here, and then we'll go into the specific context of the other two. Talk about where these accusations are coming from and why they're misdirected.
Wow, where are they coming from? They're coming from all directions, so I don't know if we can really get into that. But, I mean, to a certain extent, there's a certain status quo that is thought that wants to be protected, right? I think there's also a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about the role of livestock, especially in nature. When you hear someone talking about cow farts and the methane from cow farts and that they're the cause of all evil, you pretty much know they don't know what they're talking about, because methane mostly comes from burps rather than farts. So if they're talking about farts, the conversation that's not worth having, just walk away. But when we're talking about methane emissions from ruminants, predominantly from ruminants, we have to understand the difference between animals that are raised on pasture outside and animals that are housed. In nature, there is no waste, right? Everything works together, everything cycles. So ruminants, when they emit biogenic methane, that methane goes up into the atmosphere, converts into CO2, and comes back down, usually in about 10 years, right? But not all of that methane goes up if that animal is on the land, because the land naturally has, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, methagenesis bacteria. So bacteria that converts methane into CO2 immediately, right? And this bacteria, live in the surface of the soil. And so if an animal is burping close to the soil because he's ruminating and he's laying down, then that CO2 stays close to the ground and is then accessible to those plants that are already there. So much of that CO2 never even goes up, much of that methane never goes up. But when you have animals that are housed, so as we see in most industrial situations, then that methane remains methane, and the only place it can go is up. And then the methane that is produced from the concentration of that manure, instead of having the manure out on the land where it's cycling and those nutrients go where they need to in order for the plants to grow, and then they eat them again and they poop them again and they eat them again and they back and forth. When they're being housed, you have, suddenly a waste problem, because you have this concentration of manure that then needs to either be in a slurry pond or it needs to be processed through biogas, and hopefully it is being processed through biogas at least, right? Because then we're taking advantage of that methane and we're using that methane as renewable energy, but which then opens up another Pandora's box of conversations. But it's that misinformation or misunderstanding about how livestock can and should be managed on the land so that they're participating in these natural cycles, or they're housed into unnatural situations which are causing problems, right? So I think once we begin to understand those two sides of the coin, then we can understand why people talk about it's not the cow, it's the how.
Thank you for that overview. Stefan, can you give us an overview of where some of the accusations and the controversy that you've experienced working with farmers and in other areas of your work have come from, and how you respond to those.
Yeah, first I give you a quick personal experience with it, because I actually used to be a vegan, funny thing, and now let's not get into it, but I used to be vegan. And then why was I a vegan? Well, because I was young, and because I was idealistic, and because I had no idea how the world works. And it was literally when I understood how ecology functions, even got the idea about ecology, I was like, okay, animals are actually part of it. And then when you look deeper into it, you understand, you get to see the bigger picture. So where does it all come from? Well, what do they say? The pathway to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Like, it's like Alan Savory says. Again, I like to quote him because I'm very grateful for his wisdom. He was speaking years ago on a podcast, and he was talking about, the problem with managing complexity. We're really good at managing problems or solving problems, but we're really bad at managing complexity. And I made this vegan analogy because, I was right in my idealistic perspective, but only if I ignore everything else. So it's like we are really good at seeing the bigger picture. So I think it's all about us telling a more positive story. And this is how I work with the farms. I'm not giving them a scientific kind of background, what's happening here. They just see it. They see the outcome. They can see when the animals move, it's a rotational system pretty much we have in the crop rotation. So when the animals move from one area of the farm to the next, after 1 or 2 years, the soil structure is better, nutrient uptake is better, plant health in general is better. They can see that. So they don't need to study everything that happens. They just need to kind of get an experience of what happens if you do it. And I think it's a little bit the downfall of academia, again, quoting Alan Savory a little bit, where we are just working in silos and we are becoming experts of things, and we misunderstand how they're connected to everything else. So this is this is how I see it. So when I work with farms, I try not even to go down that rabbit hole. I try to look at the bigger picture. Very, very similar to what Marco said earlier. Like, let's see where you are. What's the next step? Let's not create this is the perfect regenerative utopia and you need to move there. No. We don't even look at that. We just saw what is the next thing we can do. And we just do that. And then we do the next, and then we do the next. And then they get a lived experience of these systems. And it's the same with the animals. They know the animals are not bad for the land, even though some paper says it. They know it because the land is getting better. So this is kind of the level I'm working on. I'm not a scientist. I don't work on the higher political level like Megan, for example. I just work with some farms, and we do one thing at a time. And so I have in a way unique perspective, because there's no misunderstanding in a way, with the farms that I work on, because they're not on that level. They don't care about these like bigger picture things, so to speak. And I don't bring them up either.
Fair enough. And that is really in line with how I've always approached this too, is much more of a process-based communication and a feedback-related, iterative kind of learning process. Now, Marco, you guys have a real integrated program of bringing students and young people out onto your farm. And I would love to know how these conversations go with them, if there's controversy that comes up from what they're taught perhaps in school or in other places, and how you articulate this with younger generations.
Thank you, Oliver. Yes, this is part of our, let's say, mission in Policaro to have students, to have people from outside, to open the farm for everyone who's interested in understanding what's going on. And yes, for sure, there are people that have their own idea when they arrive, and obviously some doesn't match with what we do here, for example, in terms of killing the animals or slaughtering the animals or whatever. What we do here is try to make a little bit step back and try to climb on the tree and look from above. And I would like that every one of us now make a little effort to remember to ourselves which is the main function and goal of a farm. We, as farmers, we have to convert as much as possible of sunlight into vegetables. This is what a farm do. Then if you want to use the grass for feeding a cow and drinking the milk, or if you want to use that energy for making cereals or vegetables or whatever, doesn't matter. The point is that we don't control the sun, we don't control the water, we can just improve our soil. And starting from this, starting from the needing of having the best photosynthesis in our farm, as Stefan was saying, no one cannot notice that, especially in a farm like mine that have the whole history in front of you. We have plus where we worked for 20 years and plus that we are just approaching, okay? No one cannot ignore the presence of the animals. Especially at the early stages of regeneration, you have all that patches of fertility, and it's so clear that that patch of fertility is nothing else than the 10 square or 20 square meters that the cow grazed in the 2 hours before that have been pooped just in a small place. And so you can really see the amazing effect that this have in the next season. You will have the grass that will be 30 centimeters tall, lush, and so will be so evident that the amount of greenhouse gases that we can put into the ground, maximizing the photosynthesis, is not comparable to the one that they can emit by burping or whatever. This work, obviously, if we are assuming that we have a quite closed system. Obviously, if I have a feedlot where I have to bring corn or soybean or whatever into a very concentrated, dense system, this doesn't work. Okay, but if the cows that are in Pulicaro are more or less the amount that the soil can feed, and you can improve this number year by year, you will decrease the greenhouse gases. You will not improve them, because it's so evident that the amount of photosynthesis is amazing, it's stunning, year by year, much more than the other one that is abandoned. So without the human being, and I want to link this again with what Megan said at the beginning, we are not out of this ecosystem. They are part of the ecosystem. So I think that the most we can do in Europe and North America is, because we don't have anymore the large herbivores in the ecosystem, is trying to do our best for imitating nature, imitating ecosystems, very humbly, try to be as humble as possible, and trying to be very responsive to the little signal or big signals that the field can give us back. I don't know if this was clear enough. I'm sorry for my English, that is.
Not at all, man. I really love that explanation. Now, building on this understanding of the ecological effects of properly managed livestock and understanding the misinformation that is out there, another one of the aspects of this work, especially since we talked a lot about adding complexity, multi-species, and things like that, there is often a conflicting need for farms to simplify to a point of efficiency for the needs of their business, while also integrating the complexity that you talked about. Maybe, Megan, you can start us off about this somewhat paradox that is necessary to manage and the tools that you use or recommend to connect those things, I guess.
Yeah, so, as we know, more complex systems are more resilient. We want to diversify our economic activities. The more diversity we have on top of the soil, the more diversity there is underneath. All of this works together. But we got to a point where we were so diverse and so complex that it was untenable, right? So it was, every species took just a little bit amount of time, but having so many species, you stack it up, and then you never got anything done and you were always behind. So it's working to understand that balance in that system. So, yes, be diverse. And I would say we're still hyper diverse, but I think we got to the point of being psychotically diverse. And so now we've toned that down a bit. We've gotten rid of the rabbits, we've gotten rid of the crazy goats. Now we just have, 2 goat lawnmowers instead of, a larger herd with, with the virtual fencing collars. We've still got the horses, we've still got the pastured broilers and the laying hens. And in fact, we're currently looking at how to scale those up significantly, because we see that we've kind of like reached a point with our pastures where, they're really good, but they could be so much better with much higher stocking rates. Right. And I think, oh yeah, I'm glad my computer agrees that we need higher stocking rates, because, when we're under, when we're understanding the context with which we are already working, because there's been so much degradation in agri-food systems over the last several hundred years, and here in the Iberian Peninsula, 2,000 years since the Romans came, you know, we don't really understand what the highest expression of the healthy ecosystem could be. Stefan's been quoting Alan quite a lot. Someone asked him recently if he'd ever seen land that had, that the stocking density was too high. And he said no, he's never seen that. And I think that's something that I've also seen. I remember a couple years ago doing training on communally managed lands in La Rioja, where this 4,000 or so hectares of communal lands 100 years ago was the summer pasture for 100,000 head of livestock coming up from Salamanca. And now they've got 4,000 head and it's overgrazed. So it's like over those 100 years of reducing that stocking density, we've basically been extracting the nutrients in that land. And so it has less and less capacity to hold those animals. And I feel like that's where we are here in our land. In order to build that back up, we need to be significantly increasing our stocking density. And what we've seen is that with the way, we're in an area where we're very blessed and have a lot of rainfall. We get 1,200 millimeters on average a year. And we can absorb, even after it's been raining like a lot, we can still absorb 130 millimeter rain event in a day. Our neighbors who, are arable farmers, conventional tillage up the wazoo, we get 20 liters and they've got runoff. So it's like there's so much more that we can be doing environmentally, but also economically, that I think we're just beginning to really understand where we can go.
Yeah, those indicators are so important to understand where you are in your journey. And also the comparisons are really powerful too, to see how far you've come. Stefan, talk to me about the challenging situation of bringing complexity onto what you described as a near desert monoculture of large arable farms, and how you reconcile that with the need for efficiency in those large operations.
Yeah, it's actually this my work, to be honest. It's transition management, right? It's literally my work title. So for me, as a fundamental principle, there are two things. First is human nature, and the other one is, well, let's talk about human nature first. What I mean by that, all of you have done something very difficult for the first time. When you do something for the first time, there's a natural need to maybe avoid it a little bit, because it's a little bit uncomfortable. You don't really know how to do it. So this is natural, and I see this with a lot of farms where the owners of the operation, which are very often like let's say like wealthy families who own a lot of land, and then they have people working for them managing the land, where it's like a top-down decisions. We want to work with the land. We want to become a regenerative farm, so to speak. So there's a natural resistance to that kind of change, which is part of human nature. So then what we do is, just like Marco said, we build a context-specific playbook for that farm. So what are we doing already? Let's say for an arable farm, you're spraying a herbicide. Okay, I could now tell you why this is a bad idea. Or I tell you, hey, take a plant step analysis 10 days before you do that spray. Maybe we can add a little bit of nutrients to that spray, which you do anyway. Oh yeah, they can do that. So, we go one step at a time. There's a framework called ESR framework by Stuart Hill. It's efficiency, substitution, redesign. So first we look at what do you do anyway? Can we do that a little bit better? And then instead of that, can we maybe do this? And then let's look at the whole thing. Maybe we can reduce the need for that. What is the root cause of that problem, etc. So it's a process. You can't go in there and tell people everything you do is wrong, and no, this is how you need to do it, especially when you don't have the answers, and especially when you have not tested them, right? So this is a big problem, for example. And then the other thing is actually context specific as well, because that's the second part, which is it has to be fitting into the operation. For example, I've come into this operation when I was new. We did some baseline measurements. We realized one of our most limiting factors is actually soil virology. We were looking at respiration rates with the Haney test, etc. So what do? Hey, let's boost it with like a compost tea, right? We start with that. Let's just do something that feels tangible and practical. Turns out on a busy spray day, that operation sprays 180,000 liters of water. Okay, now you need to make compost tea for 180,000 liters of water. That is, you need to hire 3 people for that. So it doesn't work, context is everything. So we went to fermentation, we worked with lactic acid, etc. Things we can produce in advance. So you need to let go of your ideology a little bit and just see, where are we here? And what is the next best thing that we can do? Maybe it's not that perfect solution, but there's something we can do in the right direction. And as we said before, once you make decisions in a different direction, we're talking about nature, we're talking about complex systems. The whole thing changes, including the people who are working with it. So this is kind of how I approach it. Where are we? Here's our framework. What do we already do? What can we make that a little bit better? What are the things that are actually quite bad? Can we replace them with something? And then how can we redesign the whole system step by step as the confidence and the knowledge of the people that are involved grows, and also the capability of the land, like Marco said earlier. And then the things that we actually do, they have to be operationally sound. They have to actually work. It can't be this, hey, there's a 3-year transition. Expect to have huge profit losses, but after that, everything's going to be, flowers and sunshine. That doesn't work in the real world, So it has to be profitable from day one. We talk about the J curve a lot. So, and we've done it many times. So it actually works. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
I love that.
Cadillac, we talked about this too, but yeah.
No, that's great. I really like the framing questions that you mentioned there, because they're entirely agnostic, right? No matter how you see yourself or what you define your operation as, regenerative, organic, conventional, any other thing, those are great questions to ask yourself to analyze your processes and see if there's room for improvement. Now, Marco, back to you. As someone who is really exemplifying a way of integrating so much complexity and making it work in your unique context, how do you find a balance? Are you still looking to integrate more complexity, or do you feel like you're at a limit where you can manage all of the moving parts that are going on?
We need to add bees with beehives. Now, seriously, yes, I would like to add beehives. Honestly, this kind of farming can be difficult from personal point of view, family point of view. I mean, there's so much to take care of that sometimes you think that maybe you are close to the limit, or you went over this. I want to share with you my feeling that in the last 5 years, I'm really seeing that we don't have to stop. We have to go on adding a little bit of complexity. We have to go on, because what we are now seeing is that when we have our group of animals, that is the first block of animals that go on pasture are at the moment cow and goats. And you can really see that them together, they eat on the same field without taking anything from each other. So you can add 12 goats or every 20 cow in my farm, and you don't have to feed them. And they are boosting the process of regeneration much more than just the cow by themselves. But then we have the donkeys that have to finish that kind of thistles that no one wants, even the goats, but they love. And if I will ever win my battle with the vets authority, I should put my birds right after. Because when the ants enter the area where the cow were, they start laying 25-30% more eggs and starting eating 25-30% less cereals. So it's very effective. And when there are birds into these systems, you don't have to use any kind of insecticides, no ivermectin, no deworming, because the animals simply doesn't get ticks, flies, or whatever. So I think that sometimes this is quite overwhelming in terms of really emotional. You have a lot of animals, you see a lot of life, you see also a lot of death. Animals dies, it can happen. Can be young animals, can be old animals, can be a problem, can be something, okay? So sometimes it's overwhelming, but I honestly feel, especially in the last 5 years, that there's no doubt we have to go on complexity for having an easier way to manage the farm. Every year, we see that our presence in the farm must be just a facilitator. We don't have to do much more. We have just to, again, help everyone to express his own potential, to let them work in the farm as best as possible. So honestly, I think we will go on this. Probably, yes. We are quite close, I think, because we don't want to add fans and zebra, but yes, I think that this is what we have to do.
Super cool. Well, look, I think that is a good place for me to hand over to our participants here and see what questions that they have. You can raise your hand if you would like to or ask your question yourself. But to get us started, I'm going to ask the one that was put in the chat here, which I think is relevant to all three of our speakers, which is from Katrian. Is there anything regulators like the EU should do or should stop doing to stimulate this type of farming or make it easier to start this gradual regeneration process as a farmer or to continue to pursue it? And I know definitely Marco and Megan, with your role in IATA, this is a question that you are used to working on with the group there and promoting. Megan, would you like to start us out here as the policy advocate for IATA?
Happy to. And by complete coincidence, we had a visitor yesterday and today who is a very senior bureaucrat at DG Agri at the European Commission. He just happened to be nearby on holiday and came to see what we were up to and see what it looks like in real life. And we had this exact conversation this morning, and his answer was with, I don't know if those of you who are familiar with the new CAP reform proposals that came out about a week ago, less than a week ago. The simplification that's being put forward is to give the power, or a lot of the power, back to the member states. So it's not even what can the EU be doing. It is now going to be back to the powers, to the member states to decide how they can be helping to facilitate these kinds of transitions, which I think is a bit of a twin-edged sword in the sense that that now makes it much more difficult for us because now we have to go and try to get our different, our member state leadership at national and regional and local level to understand what it is that we're doing. Just like Marco, we all feel for his fight and for many of our others fighting, with the vets to get them to understand the benefits of having different livestock species integrated together. We also have a lot of challenges getting them to understand already the impacts of the way eco schemes are designed that in fact are limiting many of us, or what should be helping us to transition to plant grazing, for example, or cover crops or anything else that it's meant to help, but the way it's designed by bureaucrats who don't understand ecosystem processes and don't understand on the ground land management are actually inhibiting. So I would love, had it stayed at the EU level, and really put in those kinds of roles and measures that would facilitate the transition. But they're basically just kind of washing their hands of the whole thing and saying it's up to the member states, go get them to do it. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this works out in the next 18 months when we've got the trilogue and negotiations with the European Parliament and the member states, the Council and the Commission, see where we actually go. But I really hope that it's not going to end up being this really decentralization and making it even more difficult to get this kind of transition through. What do you
That's
guys
an interesting
think?
perspective, especially because these are new developments that are happening in real time. This is a lot to pivot around. Stefan, can you tell us about your experience with this? Because I know you've gotten some support for what you're doing as well. I'm wondering if you've got any barriers in your way.
Yeah, so it's such an interesting conversation because it's such a broad topic. And to Megan, what you just said, like I'm all for decentralization because of the history of Europe, right? Like especially in the eastern parts of Europe, we're all for decentralization on this part of the European Union. But the way I understand how it is right now is, and this is kind of what I benefited from as well, that the European Union is setting out an objective and then it's for the member states to implement that. And it makes sense because context is different between Estonia and Romania, for example, right? So there's a lot of sense in that. So we benefit from this because there was this EU call to, well, get people into farming and there's an investment grant. And I spoke a lot with the government because Estonia is a very small country. The channels are very close. And I actually applied for a grant and I received a 100,000 euro grant to build this integrated crop livestock system where we're actually bringing the animals back on arable land. And they were all for it. And they actually told me they have real problems because they have this money from the EU, but they have no way to spend it because no one is applying for it. So there's a lot actually where actually you guys, climate farmers, there's a lot that we as people within the European Union can actually do and have to do and create opportunities and knowledge exchange and all these kind of things that, well, this is part of it, I guess, to actually make use of the things that already exist. And it's a bit schizophrenic because of course there are things that then throw a roadblock into it. It's like on one side, someone pushes you on the bike and then on the other side, someone throws a stick into your front wheel. It is a little bit like that. And that's just something to navigate. And I hope EARA is going to clean some of that up. So just to kind of clear it up, there's a lot of opportunity already, I think. It's just so difficult to manage that because when I wrote the application, I actually had to hire someone to help me write it because it's like, come on, like who's going to write these kind of grant applications? So it should be maybe a little bit easier. Then more people would do it, maybe.
Yeah, I can testify to the difficulty of trying to navigate the regulatory system and apply for subsidies and stuff as I'm building my farm here. Marco, you have direct experience butting heads with regulation that tells you to manage your livestock in a worse way. Tell me about that experience and what are some of the core things that you think need to change to actually enable the way you're trying to manage and for others to do the same?
I have a quick answer and a real one. The quick one is that we should just provide 12 years free holiday for all the bureaucrats in Europe and all the state members, so the ecosystem can self-regulate again. Okay, it's a silly answer, but there is something true into this, because at the moment, system provide a lot of money to something and a lot of regulation to others, and this is very out of balance. Now, more seriously, the real problem to me is that there is no regulation for this kind of operations. There's no specific regulation for pasture-raised chickens. So at the moment, from the European level to the single vet that come checking Pulicaro animals, they apply checklists that are built for big, immense indoor factories. So this is, to me, the biggest problem at the moment, that find its own route into a system that completely ignore the practice of checking the outcomes. What I always says is that okay, if eventually, think about the avian flu, okay? If all the biosecurity regulations, all the disinfections, the chemical products, the gloves, and all this stuff was working, after 20 years, we should be in a situation where avian flu was under control. But in the past 20 years, avian flu just get worse and worse and worse and worse. So what I go crazy with is that there is no one that wanna check outcomes and evidence. It is stronger to have a very disinfected indoor concrete floor is more effective. This or is more effective to reduce 99% the density of your flock. It is more effective to get the sun rays and the thermal fluctuations during day and night into your barn, or to spray heavy chemicals for killing all the viruses. There are studies about this. There are people that are studying this, and the outcomes are quite incredible. Into a greenhouse, you can sterilize everything. You can kill the avian flu with less than 36 hours, because you can reach 40 degrees. And up to 40 degrees, the virus of avian influenza just live a few hours. You know what I mean? I'm trying to make simple examples that show how there is another path, there is another way, but especially at the European level, in general, bureaucrats doesn't know, or even worse, they don't wanna see. It's not a matter of being hippie, of being, not serious producing food for people. It's not this the point. The point is that scientifically, what they are doing is not working. We are using every year more antibiotics. We have every year more troubles. So their protocol doesn't work. Let's start moving our eyes to see that if there is another solution, because there is. So I think that this, for me, is the biggest challenge of the next 10 years, because we are here speaking about how fantastic it is to introduce animals into farms, into cereal crops, into different ecosystems. But if this will become out of the law, will be not possible legally to do, and we are very close to this. In Italy, in my area, you cannot anymore open a new free-range turkey activity, flock. I can raise my turkeys because I already did it 15 years ago. But if Francesco, that is close to me, he wanna open a farm 1 kilometer far from here, he wanna start raising turkeys on pasture, he cannot. He's not allowed to do it. There's no that they will oblige him to do certain things. He's not allowed to do. Into the law in Italy, it's written that you cannot do this anymore. No turkeys on pasture. Dot. So to me, this is the biggest challenge we all will face in the future. Please, Steph.
Yeah, for me, this is so interesting. Sorry to take the time, but the farm that I do the beef operation on, it's a collaboration between the large-scale arable farm and the sister of the well, they're both the heirs of the farm. Their parents started the farm, so the son is running the operation, and the sister, she's a biologist, and now she wanted to do she wanted to connect different forests and strips on the fields with each other for animals, and then they got punished for that. So they had to reduce subsidies, and they got in real trouble for doing that because they changed the field status, which was a big bureaucratic problem, because somewhere in the computer it says this is a field and this is not a field, so it's a problem. The computer says no, kind of situation, right? So what they did, and this is again where the European Union is actually quite helpful, they did a research project, which for these early idea research projects, they are 70% grant funded. So you need to find 30% of the money, and you go to your university, and they did. They went to the biologists and they said, we want to do this connection between between tree strips and manage what happens. And they got the grant, and now they have it, and they actually, with the paper they create, they're going to influence politics because they build hard evidence. So but that requires like certain type of people, and to run a farm like your Marco requires certain type of people. So it's like, again, maybe this is where AR, and there's so much opportunity to actually make these channels. They are kind of already exist, but someone has to, take the lead and start working on these things. And it's much better to be for something than to be against something. So what are we actually trying to do here? And then what's the path towards it, right? This is kind of how we are approaching it here, and it seems to work. Estonia is very different than Italy, I understand that, but I think that within the system there are already ways to do it. It's just so difficult to walk those ways, actually, but they're already there.
Yeah, thanks for giving us more workload, Stefan. Really, really appreciate it. But no, in reality, I mean, what you're talking about is exactly how I advise people. If what you want to do is currently illegal, set up an EU research project, a Horizon project, a Life project. You'll get the permission to do it that way, and then take the results and take that to your local policymakers and get the regulation changed. Unfortunately, as a result of the new cap proposal that came out this past week, most of that life funding is going out the window. So that's no longer going to be available. So my suggestion for everybody is get your life applications in ASAP. You've got less than 2 years of that budget left. So figure out what those regulatory are, get those projects together, get them done, and try to make as much of this last window of opportunity potentially possible.
Just a quick question, Megan. Is that something that AR is doing? Because all these Life FP projects, are not all of them, but very often they're Interact projects, right, between member countries. So someone like Marco could join, and then like all kinds of different people could join, and then apply together. Is that something that AR will facilitate?
It's not something that ER is facilitating, but for Horizon projects, I don't even know how many we've been asked to participate in and be part of consortiums this year. Abundance, Blessed, we're a bit sexy right now. So I know there's been at least a dozen requests. I don't know how many, could be more than a dozen. I don't know how many we're actually going to end up applying with. I think 7 to 10, something like this. But on the individual member level, we have our our knowledge and education working group, which is working to create these linkages between members and try to source some kinds of funding for training, for on-farm knowledge exchange and that kind of stuff, but not facilitating, let's say, consortiums for interreg projects or for life projects. But one would hope that the relationships that we're building amongst members and others within the network will be able to lead to those, so that we can see more of those kinds of projects coming along.
Now, we could easily have an entire panel just on this big topic of how the regulations can be adapted, removed, or updated in order to facilitate these transitions. Let's look at, well, first of all, if anybody has another question, please feel free to raise your hand digitally. We've got about 15 more minutes left for this session, and I wanted to go back to one of the questions in the chat, which is about the conversion of methane, whether cattle are on pasture or whether they are fed grain rations. And I saw you jump on this one, Megan. Do you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, happy to. So from a biological perspective, ruminants were evolved over, millions of years to eat cellulose, to break down grass. Corn and other grains are starch, which requires a different process in the gut. They can break it down, and they break it down much better than equines, for example. But their rumen best functions on grass. And so if you talk to a grass-fed cattle rancher, they will tell you that a cow's first year, the entire job that this rancher has is to develop that cow's rumen because that is what is going to determine its ability to resist drought, to get fat on lower quality feed, this whole thing, right? So this is the job of that livestock manager. Now, when you introduce cereals into a cow's diet, it adjusts it changes the microbiology that's within that gut. Basically, what happens is it's like when we eat junk food, we're introducing a tummy ache. So when we have that tummy ache, methane production goes up. It's just the natural reaction of that biology in the gut. So the more that we can develop that rumen and to do what it does naturally, so break down that cellulose, break down that grass, and convert that into meat or into milk, not only will the animal be healthier, not only will it have lower methane emissions, but to also have a much higher profit margin because you are not spending money on grain or inputs or whatever it requires for you to farm that additional feed. So, so if what we're trying to do is create a system that is health first, soil health first, animals are exhibiting their natural behavior, and working with nature and these natural processes, that is inherently going to reduce our production costs and improve our margins, which is then going to improve the economic resilience and stability of our businesses. So it's all tied in together. I think one challenge that we have to come up against is the fact that with the industrialization of the meat industry, we as consumers have gotten used to the taste of corn-fed or grain-fed meat rather than grass-fed, which has a different texture, that requires a different curing process, that requires a different kind of slaughtering, temperatures in the hanging or in the cooling, so there's a lot of things that change when you're having a grass-fed system rather than a grain-fed system. Same thing for which breeds we're using. When you've got a grain-fed system, you typically have, these very large animals that have these very large caloric requirements, and then you get, these big double-muscled animals. You get that, fat infiltration for the marbling, and that all comes from grain. But if you just got a grass-fed system, then you're going to want a different breed that is going to have a smaller frame, that's lower to the ground, that has a lower caloric intake, and that converts grass better. So there's a lot of things to kind of think of if we're seeing how we're going to be shifting our systems from what we're raising, how we're raising, and what we're selling and who's buying it, right? But so complex conversations, it's not as simple as that, but I think it all comes down to the fact that ruminants shouldn't be eating grain. They just got tummy ache and bad burps.
Thank you for that. Do either of you guys want to add to dietary considerations through management in the systems that you guys run?
I just would like to add that there is a matter of, as Megan was saying, of breeds that work better or worse on pasture, but it is also a matter of the single animal getting used to his own environment. I've seen cows and calves that needed 2 seasons, 3 seasons, like almost a year, or really that was coming from outside and they were in theory good for breeds that were used for pasture, but then they needed a lot of time for develop the rumen that is needed for grazing in Pulicaro and not from maybe another area where there is more. I want to add another thing that is really, this I think is really interesting and help us to understand better how it works into the cows. They are big animals that grows quite fast, just with grass. They need proteins. And from our point of view, we immediately think that we have to give them proteins. So soy, so whatever. But the amazing part of these animals is that they can produce their own proteins, exactly how Megan was saying, so digesting the cellulose through bacteria and yeast that have a quite fast turnover into the gut of the cow that are proteins. So the cow cultivates its own proteins, feeding the animals that live into his own gut and digesting them. They are amazing animals. So sometimes, for example, can be more useful if you have very, especially in the Mediterranean climate, if you have a very dry pasture, can be more useful to just provide a little block of cane sugar for helping balance the sugar that are, you say, that are missing into the grass, because the grass is not sugary anymore because it's dry, instead of feeding them with proteins, because they can cultivate their own protein.
Thank you for that insight. I want to give the last question there to Ricardo. Go ahead, bud.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring a topic that it's my own itch, which is access to land. And Megan referred that it's much cheaper to raise cows on grass, and I really love this way of doing it. I did it myself, but not on my land. And here in Portugal, at least, and most of the producers do it by adding grain, but because it's probably still cheaper than acquiring land. Like, is there any grants of ways that are available to either rent or use land? I travel in Portugal and I see so much wasted land. And the prices are really increasing, which makes it grass-fed also expensive if you want to make a business case out of it. Thank you.
Stefan, go ahead.
Operation. I don't own any of the land that I work on. So all the, like the I was talking about this €100,000 grant, and I think it's a good question, and it's one of the main reasons we started this operation, because the landscape is changing. I know it's the same in Portugal, it's the same here. We're moving into the energy sector where, you know, they produce biogas, so the land prices, now we are competing with the energy market. We have no chance, right? Like as a farmer, even for the larger scale producers. So the agricultural land, let's say, landscape is changing. So how does a young farmer or someone moving into farming actually start farming? And this is the idea of our operation. So our whole farm is mobile. All the infrastructure we have is a mobile infrastructure. We're only working on semi-permanent and annual landscape. You know, I was reading in the comments, someone was saying, is the cow just enough? We're not introducing a cow. We're starting with 26 different species in a cover crop, and with that we get all the microbes, all the life that comes with that, birds, insects, all of that, and then we put a cow on it as the steering engine. And this is the value for the arable farmers, because they want all that stuff, and we use the cow as a tool. And I just happen to own the cows. And this year is this, whatever, 100 hectares. And next year, 50 hectares of that moved to another place. And, you know, I moved the fences along with it's part of the crop rotation. That's how a whole farm is set up. So if you find a producer that is open, you can set up your own operation on his land, and he will get all the benefits that your animals and the extended crop rotation bring, and you get to produce grass-fed beef. And this is pretty much what we're doing, actually, Ricardo, just to kind of give you maybe also it's possible. And yeah,
That's a great idea and a fantastic opportunity in many aspects of farming, where movable or otherwise non-permanent enterprises can be integrated with an oversimplified farm operation for the benefit of both sides. I think there's going to be huge opportunities for that going forward. And I also think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up today. I thank you all so much for joining us. Quickly before you go, keep in mind that this series is going to continue to go on. We try to do one of these every month. If you would like to stay up to date, you could follow Climate Farmers on our social media. And if you are farming actively anywhere in Europe, you're welcome to join the Climate Farmers community for free. And yeah, where you'll be able to interact with many of our members who are speaking on these panels. I also highly recommend that you reach out to IATA, which is doing great work on the policy advocacy side and disseminating really important information about what is happening in the Regen Ag movement here in Europe. And also the Savory Global and Savory Institute networks that are helping to promote holistic management of livestock, but also the holistic management framework to all types of enterprises and different ways of managing complexity all around the world. Find the hub that's closest to you or reach out to Megan because she has a lot of spare time and loves to answer emails. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you all for joining. This will be republished on the Climate Farmers YouTube channel and on the Regenerative Skills podcast, where you can find all of our previous panels as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you all so much for your time today. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Thanks a
having
lot.
us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Guys,
Thank you.
pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.